All right, let's go get this show on the road. It's being recorded so other folks can catch up or watch it afterwards. So, welcome everyone. We're really excited to have you here today for our hands-on intro to CDPs workshop. We're really excited about our sample apps, and we have actually a few engineers with us from the team that built it to support as well. So, really excited about that. Before we get going, let's talk about some housekeeping items. First, the obvious one, just please make sure you have a solid internet connection. This is a interactive workshop. So hoping that you can follow along with us and ask questions along the way. You are muted upon entry. If you want to speak up and ask you questions in that format, please, we're happy to unmute you and bring you into the webinar. This is a little bit more informal. It's a workshop, so please feel free to do that. You also have the opportunity to use the QA chat if you prefer that. If you have any technical questions or any ad hoc questions about what we're talking about. I know Zoom has those reactions, so if you want to use that too, just whatever you want to use and comfortable with, please do. And as I mentioned, we are recording this, so if you miss something, no worries. We'll send you that after the workshop. All right, so here's a quick overview of what we're covering today. First, let's set the context by reviewing the problem and concept, how CDPs can help at a high level. And then we'll dive into the actual fun stuff with the workshop. Today's presenters include Sean Ryan from our technical writing team and myself, Shafiq Shivji from the product marketing team. Again, really excited to be here today with you guys. So, all right, let's start with the high level. So let's introduce CDPs, and I'm going to give you a short narrative about this fictitious organization called mCorp. It's a mid-sized business that sells clothing. So hope it's not too cheesy for you. Meet Jake. Jake's a senior growth marketer for mCorp, and he's responsible for crafting data-driven marketing strategies and quickly iterating on tactics to attract, win, and retain customers. Customer data is absolutely crucial for Jake to do his job. He needs to have that deep understanding about who his customers are, what they like, so he can put together and deliver targeted marketing campaigns, ideally in real time, that drive sales. Jake learns about a new designer clothing line about to launch and conjures up the perfect ideal customer profile for his campaign. He works with his favorite copywriter to create messaging and marketing campaigns to garner interest from his target audience. Now all he really needs is the data. He thinks it can't be that hard to get the data, right? So he slacks his mCorp's data PM, Rachel, and says, "Hey, Rach, could you pull a list of customers that meet these criteria? By the way, I need it in the next day or two. Thanks." Rachel sees Jake's message and thinks, wait, what customer data? Why does Jake need this? 1 to 2 days is going to be really hard. She responds asking Jake to explain. And after a short exchange, Rachel goes, let me see what I can do. But I can tell you now, 2 days is going to be almost impossible for us. But let me run it by the data team and get back to you. Jake's starting to feel that he's in a bind. All right. As promised, Rachel reviews Jake's request with mCorp's data team. Susie, a data engineer, and Paul, an app developer. Rachel's first task is to scope out the work. So she asks Susie if they even have the data they need to build out Jake's audience. Susie says she can get a lot of the data, but it's spread across multiple tables in the data warehouse. And there's some data that's not even in there. I'll have to write and execute a bunch of SQL statements to collect and union it. But to be honest, I'm not sure how accurate and up-to-date the tables are. Paul chimes in and says that he can write the code to track the additional events. But since the app and the website can't retroactively collect event data, Jake won't have it for the current campaign. And as for timing, Susie will have to wait for her current 2-week sprint to finish, to schedule the work. And Paul will have to wait for the next product release. And unfortunately, there is a freeze to merge new code. So he's not even sure when the new events are going to be tracked. Rachel's not looking forward to having to tell Jake that he'll have to wait at least 2 to 3 weeks to get the data that he needs. I'm sure this sounds familiar to a lot of folks on the call. Susie, however, being the rock star that she is, gets Jake a CSV file in less than 2 weeks. However, it's still missing the new event data because of the code freeze. Not great, but Jake will have to just make do. The clothing line already launched and he's missing his window of opportunity. So Jake takes the CSV file and manually loads it into the separate marketing tools mCorp uses to reach his target audience. That was a lot of work, thanks to Jake. And he has so many more campaign ideas that he wants to test, not to mention new marketing tools he wants to use. But he doesn't want to go through this experience again. Ideally, there'd be a way he could custom build audiences on his own and have the ability to experiment with new MarTech tools. On the other side, on the data team side, in their monthly retro, Susie and Paul tell Rachel it's very difficult for them to fulfill these one-off requests for marketing. It's too distracting. It takes away from the work that they're directly accountable for. The team knows that they need to break this cycle with a better solution to serve their stakeholders. So let's put this narrative, this example, into context of what modern businesses universally face. First of all, data is everywhere. And to create the experiences that customers expect, like Jake's clothing line campaign, businesses really need to have a scalable mechanism to capture the customer data across a wide array of sources. Data coming from these disparate sources creates inherent complexity or chaos, both in terms of where the data is stored and the volume of data created. Accessing and enabling customer data without underlying infrastructure requires a high degree of technical expertise. And even with that expertise, it requires a lot of engineering hours to implement and maintain. And these are skills that elude most marketing and product teams. To deliver the modern experiences, personalized experiences that customer expects, businesses also need to collect and process bespoke user data. The more complete a profile, the more personalized the experience. So how can CDPs help with this? Well, customer data infrastructure allows businesses to capture data from any source in any form, typically with a few lines of code. Once instrumented by a developer, data flows into the CDP where data engineers, PMs, and marketers can collaborate using simple user interfaces to control which data is sent where. And real-time data feeds ensure that customer profiles are always up to date, which translates to higher conversion rates, better customer experiences, and actionable insights for analytical purposes. All right, so piping data and resolving identities is not the only challenge customers face. And I just want to touch on some of these topics because they're important, but they're not the core focus of today's workshop. Businesses need to ensure that data is delivered, to the destination is high quality. We all heard the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. Customers also expect brands to deliver those one-on-one personalized experiences. Think of like product recs on Amazon or suggested media content on Netflix or personalized in-app messaging. These experiences are only possible with real-time data. We also must respect consumer privacy, not only because of regulations like GDPR and CCPA, but to really foster trust with customers. Having just data piping through does not ensure that compliance. Also, new data sources and changes to existing channels cause constant data chaos for teams. And teams really need to be in a position to be able to adapt to these changes. Imagine just being able to drag and drop integrations versus having to manually update and add. And finally, scalability and availability are critical for any digital business. We all know that downtime hurts the bottom line. All right, so let me illustrate this for if those of you are more technically inclined. Let me illustrate this in how this CDP would simplify data collection across your stack. Say you build native apps for web, iOS, and Android. and you want to instrument them with 3 destinations and your data warehouse. So what do? You first look up your analytics tool, drop in the SDK, instrument a few things, and great. Now you have analytics feeding into the apps feeding analytical data to the tool. Great. But then you want to do social. Okay, you instrument that, then messaging, then finally your data warehouse. Oh, but you know what? Those tools down there are also collecting and creating data. So you need to be able to, take insights from your analytics platforms, impressions from your ads platform, or open rates for your messaging platform. You can see that data collection becomes a tangled web very fast. Without a CDP, maintaining integrations for multiple tools really is redundant. CDK bloat results in degraded app performance. Think about when you have a mobile app and you're trying to increase performance and make faster download times. Also, when new tools are introduced, developers have to build them in and maintain these new integrations. Also, it's really hard to attribute data to profiles correctly. Think about users as they go to your apps anonymously and then become identified. And then what if they're using a mobile app and then go to a web app? So it becomes hard to be able to attribute that data to one profile. All right, so a CDP helps really centralize this process. And it does it by establishing one version of the data from point of origin to each of the tools collecting these duplicate events and attributes. It avoids low value engineering workloads of having to manage multiple SDKs and duplicate data capture. It improves the speed to market and time to value for adding new tools and product capabilities. It also lets you leverage fully baked productized server integrations to ensure data consistency everywhere. And not to mention, it enables non-technical personas to be able to create the data on their own and build things like custom audiences. So there's a lot of power when you have that capability built in. All right, so let's segue into the workshop now that we've set some of this context and translate what we've seen in slides to practical implementation. So you would have received an email maybe an hour or two ago to prompt you to create your mParticle account. So I would encourage you to go ahead and do that. The email would have looked something similar to this from mParticle, support.mparticle.com. And there's a little green button that says create account. And if you click that, it'll open a web browser here where you can enter your information to create that account. So let me pause here for a few seconds and let you do that. While you're doing that, let me actually prompt you to the second email that you would have received, this one from me directly. And that will basically, so we have two options here. One, you can follow along our steps as we implement the sample app and connect it to mParticle, or we have pre-configured a sample app for you. In that email, there is a link that you can click. So either you can follow us along and install the app locally, or you can just watch what we're doing. And when we get to the point, I'll just make a note to say, hey, this is where you can follow along by just using the app that you have. And by the way, when you do click that pre-configured URL, we're using a tool called Local Tunnel. It's completely safe to use. It's going to prompt you that this is that we're using this tool. So you can go and click continue, and it'll take you to the app. All right, so I'm going to pause here for a second, and then Sean, why don't you take over and introduce yourself, and let's hit the show on the road.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Shafiq, very much for that great context and background on that. My name is Sean Ryan, as Shafiq introduced me earlier. I'm a member of our content team. I'm a technical writer here at mParticle, and I help to kind of bring our technical tools and developer tools and everything that we make for engineers to life, and help people understand how they can get value out of them in the context of actually integrating our tools into your engineering workflows. So what I'm going to do now is kind of transition and into talking about our sample apps that we've recently rolled out for developers to use. And what these are sample applications for web, iOS, and Android that provide developers a hands-on way to understand how mParticle collects and forwards data so that you can easily implement data collection in your own projects. So basically, you can think of this as like a living, breathing form of documentation that you can actually run and you can actually get your hands on, and you can see our SDK working in real life, production level environments. And I'm gonna go into a lot more detail on what that means as I explore the sample apps with you all. But that's basically it. And the idea behind creating these tools for developers. So I'm going to share my screen now. And what I have open now are two things. I have an mParticle workspace open here, and I have my GitHub. This is the sample apps repo that I'm going to be using to actually clone the sample apps and get started with them. So I'm just going to grab this link to clone the repo locally. Oh, interesting. Oh, you know what? I may have to delete this because I did this in the last run through, and it's telling me that I can't have two things that are named the same thing in the same destination. So let's try it again. Git clone. Just take a second to actually clone over all these folders. And there we go. Now I'm gonna grab the project we just cloned and open it up in my favorite IDE, VS Code here. So now that I have this open in my my editor, just going to copy the relative path to, sorry, it's actually this, to the web sample app, and move down there in the directory. And the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that my node version is up to date. So I'm going to use nvm use LTS and make sure I'm on a version of node that's going to allow us to install the packages. And now I am. So I'm just going to run npm install, which will install all the node modules that we need. This is probably a familiar process to anybody who's working in a web environment, any web devs that are joining us today. Okay, looks like we got through that without much issue. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to our mParticle workspace that we've created specifically to kind of work with this sample app here. And in addition to rolling out the sample apps, we've also kind of created this onboarding tutorial that's meant to be used as a side-by-side with these apps. And what this does is basically just give you kind of a pilot that introduces you to working with mParticle and shows you quickly how to set up an input for data, set up an output for that data, and then connect the two of those so you can easily see how data flows from a source into mParticle and then out to an outbound destination. So we're going to start doing that now. Now that we have our sample app cloned, I'm just going to indicate that I've cloned the repo to move forward. So the step that we're on now is where we're actually going to set up the input. And an input really is just any source from which you can send data to mParticle. That could be anything from your web app, your mobile app, backend systems, or really any platform that you from which you can make an HTTP request and that you want to collect data from. So since this is a web app that we're going to be setting up as an input, we're going to go over here and click on web. Now we're going to click issue keys, and this is going to generate our API key and secret, which sometimes takes a few seconds. Oh, that was much quicker than it was last time through. So we're actually only going to need our API key in this instance. We don't need the secret to connect it to our sample app. So what I'm going to do here is go over to this environment variable folder, and I'm going to take off the test extension in the file name. And I will replace this placeholder here with our actual API key that we generated in mParticle. So now we are going to be all set to actually run this app locally. So I'm just going to run npm start. And this should get us up and running on localhost. And I'll make sure kind of where that we're in sync here with our tutorial. Okay, so doing what we just did established our first input with mParticle, and all that really required was generating the API key inside of the the setups part of the UI with the web the web portion of that, adding that API key to the web app, and that's really it. Now that we'll just give this app a few seconds to start to get itself up and running on localhost, and then once it is, we will continue and see more magic happen with data flowing into mParticle. Sometimes takes just a second to get the dev server up and running locally.
You gotta invest in more RAM for your PC, man.
Yeah, I know. I should reach out to IT about that.
I'm just kidding. I was curious. I tested. I have a Windows machine and obviously Mac, and surprisingly, it ran faster on my Windows machine to initiate.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So.
Yeah. You don't know. I mean, it's very environment specific. You can. Okay, so now we're up and running. We're on localhost now, and this is our sample app. This is the UI that we've developed for this. This is it's a fictional e-commerce application called Higgsmart. Higgs is our mascot that we've kind of developed and rolled out recently. So throughout this whole this e-commerce application, the mParticle Web SDK is installed and instrumented to collect events as we go through flows and perform actions throughout the site. And as we do that, you'll see how different actions trigger different events to come into mParticle. But for now, let's go back over to the live stream, the user tutorial here, and just say that we see events, because that's what these are right here. So live stream is the portion of the UI that we'll get to that in a second. But for now, I just want to go back over to our live stream and just explain a little bit more about this. So now that we've we have our inputs set up, Higgsmart is connected to mParticle. What you see here are actually some of the events that we fired off already. So you have a screen view, you have a session start, and even a couple custom events that have been fired after I've kind of done my first few clicks over here. And obviously, this is all happening in real time. So as we, the user, are going through different flows within the sample app, that data is going right into mParticle, and it's available for us to inspect, to QA, and to perform real-time data activation use cases on as it arrives right here. This is sort of like central command of your of your data world here in mParticle. This is where you can see everything that you've implemented happening and appearing right before your eyes, and it's kind of a very it's a powerful place, and you could do a lot from your live stream. But for now, we also want to set this up to an output so we can see the full flow of data. So as I said earlier, outputs are just the destinations for your events. So these, in this example, we're going to be using a webhook just because it's easy to get that up and running. But This can be anything from an analytics tool like indicative or mixed panel. It could be a data processing service. It could be a data warehouse, a marketing tool like Braze or Apps Flyer, you name it. This is the part of the UI where we can see all of our outputs and create new ones. We're going to click here to create a new webhook output. And we're going to give it the configuration name web sample app. So we're going to open webhooks.site to generate a new webhook. And we're going to copy this URL to our clipboard, pop that in right there. All right, so now we've created a new output, and the last thing we're going to need to do to actually tie the two of those things together is to create a connection. And a connection is sort of just like the glue that allows you to send data from an input to an output. It's all the configuration settings that tell mParticle how you want data to be sent from point A to point B. And that's kind of the steps that we're taking here. So we're going to select our webhook that we just created. This is the configuration window where you can, set a bunch of different configuration settings that say how you want this connection to work. We're going to toggle this to active. We're going to untoggle event batching because that makes things come through a little bit more quickly in a development environment. And we'll just click add connection to finish up the connection. Okay.
Hey, Sean, why don't we pause here for a second? We covered a lot, and give folks a chance to go through the steps and see if there's any questions from a technical aspect or even just a point of clarification. It's really easy for us to do these because we live and breathe CDP all day, every day. But setting up that first connection and seeing the data come in, and then really then setting that output and then connecting them to get together. It's very intuitive abstractly, but then actually learning a new UI and going through the flow, it takes a second. But once it's set up, it's really it becomes very intuitive, as you can see. And one thing I'll point out, as Sean was giving the demo, is we've put together this onboarding workflow tutorial, if you will, to help you kind of walk through those initial steps and make it easier. So feel free to take your time. The tutorial has been enabled on all of your accounts to read through, click through, and follow that along as Sean and I are going through this. So if there's any questions, why don't we just maybe pause a minute here for folks to ask anything that they need to ask, or just kind of catch up. All right, the lines are quiet, so maybe we can move on to the next one. One thing I will say before we do that is the actual, once you set up the webhook, it does take some time to propagate through our system. So I think if you saw, Sean, on the message, it did say, I think it takes about 5 minutes to propagate that through. So maybe we can go through some code examples and show folks what exactly the instrumentation side of it looks like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, this is our, I was kind of just going through our onboarding flow, and as Shafiq mentioned, that's a really great tool to get, to get anybody who's going to be using mParticle up to speed on how mParticle works, how we collect data, how you make connections. But our sample apps really are, this is the tool that we've created pretty specifically for developers, and the purpose behind these is to eliminate any mystery behind how our SDK works, and really give engineers like a playground to get their hands on our SDK and see it working in a live production environment. So literally, I mean, we have web, iOS, and Android sample apps, and we specifically built those with technologies that are very commonly used and in modern development. The web app, for instance, is a React application, which is very, obviously a very popular front-end framework. And so I think a lot of developers are actually going to be able to find that they can use the implementations that are in these sample apps pretty verbatim, pretty word for word's not quite right because it's code, but you get the idea. Yeah, I think you'll actually be able to copy and paste some of these examples and then kind of just make fine adjustments for your own implementation as need be. So being that this is an e-commerce app, we made pretty heavy use of mParticle's commerce events. And what those are it's just a mechanism that our web SDK provides developers for specifically being able to collect some of the common data that you would want to see and capture throughout customer journeys within an e-commerce application. So you can imagine those are things like adding an item to a cart, removing an item from a cart, viewing a product detail, capturing all the information about the product that that a user is looking at. And the reason why we have kind of bespoke API conventions for capturing this data is to enforce consistency and to make sure that when that information is captured and sent to mParticle, you're easily able to send that data out and map it to the APIs of the systems where you're eventually going to want to leverage it in activation use cases. So let's look at a couple samples of events. One of the big workhorses of our sample app here, our e-commerce sample app, is the product detail page, and that is. I always forget whether it's in components or pages, but it's in pages. So the product detail page corresponds to this here. It's the page that a customer would land on and see all this information about a product. And obviously there's a lot of detail there that would be very useful for capturing to leverage in activation. So this is the component in our React app that is rendering the product detail page. And you can see we're importing mParticle from our web SDK node module, which lives in our node packages here in the app. And one event that I want to take a look at is just a view detail event. The first thing that we do to be able to meaningfully send data along about what the user is looking at is we create an object using mParticle's create product method, which lives on our e-commerce web SDK API. And this is just a way that we're able to grab things like the label, the ID, the price, and other attributes about the product and package it into kind of a consistent object that will eventually send and forward along when we send the event. And another thing you might be noticing about this is that it's full of comments. This is really chock full of just detail about what we're doing here, the events that we're using, some of the recommendations and best practices around how to use our SDK. And this is all written by our developers for the purpose of helping other engineers understand exactly what's going on here, why these specific choices were made, to really leave nothing up to guesswork, to leave nothing up to trial and error, and make it very clear exactly how our SDK works, specifically in this environment. So this is the place where we're actually setting up the product object that we're going to be sending along later on. And then down here, a little further down in our component, we're using the use effect hook, which if you're familiar with using React, use effect is a very widely used hook that that fires on whenever a component renders. So it's a really useful way to send something, to send along data that you want to capture when the user has arrived at a certain part of the UI. And in this case, this is where we're actually logging that product action with our our mParticle e-commerce event, and sending the the details of the product that we've captured earlier on over to mParticle. So that, and now that we have that set up, when we view all these different products like a unisex tee, some stickers, a tennis ball, and things like that, once we go back over to live stream, we see all of those e-commerce events, and we see information about the products that we're looking at. So here is the tennis ball that we just looked at. Here is everything else that we just looked at, and the fleece, the logo tee, and we can get the details about each of those individual products as they're popping into live stream in real time. So you can imagine all of the use cases that this kind of enables marketers and PMs to be able to act on. One kind of pretty straightforward one is perhaps building audiences of people who view specific products to retarget them, and kind of personalized messaging, whether that's via email, in-app messaging, SMS, or any other way that you would want to follow up with a customer after that they visited a specific specific product. It's also a really great way to not lose data along the customer journey. That if you were just capturing if you're just capturing information about what people actually purchased after having completed a purchase, you would lose a lot of this information, like what they viewed, the different products that they saw along their customer journey, what they added to their cart, what they removed from their cart. These are all things that we're capturing, along the user journey, and that our marketers have at their disposal to be able to, tie together to any downstream activation tool that they want. I mean, if you think back to the scenario that Shafiq laid out earlier on, Jake, our marketer would not have to rely so heavily on data engineers to pull this data together to run complex SQL queries. All of that is kind of right there at Jake's disposal to be able to filter and forward and act on in real time.
Hey, Sean, we're going back to the audience use cases. One we talked about earlier was cart abandonment, which is, you see that in our e-commerce. And it actually dawned on me like 2 days ago with my kids. They were I help them brush their teeth. They're 5 years old, so sometimes getting the toothpaste on the toothbrushes, I do that for them. And it was running out, so I got out my phone and I added it to my cart, and I thought I checked out. And a couple of days later, when I went, we were completely out. I was just like, hey, how come that never got delivered? And I was like, sure, I ordered it. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's still in the cart. Had I gotten the cart abandonment push notification, I definitely would have checked out. So definitely, I see the practicality of this sort of technology, come into play at daily lives. Another example, when you're showing all of the product impressions like that show up on that homepage for the app. We just did a workshop with Amazon using their personalized software, which is does product recommendations, and we were feeding their ML engine, their model, with real-time product views and impressions and stuff, and then from that generating product recommendations and next best product. So the use cases and the complexity and the personalization, the amazing experiences you can create for customers is really, I think you mentioned this, either this one or the last one, it's limited by your imagination only.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I mean, as you were talking about the that cart abandonment anecdote about how you would have been tragically toothpasteless had you forgot to complete your order. I'm just pulling, these are the utility functions that we're using within our cart to handle actions like that. So, being that this is a React app, there are a lot of just like kind of common event handlers that are fired on when users interact with different components. So that's really how we're triggering these events and sending them to mParticle. Handle remove cart is, along with handle checkout and all of these other kind of checkout activities. Within the context of this app, we're sort of packaging them up into kind of like a features, like a utility component here, and then we pass these over to the actual cart component that renders the cart in the UI, and we just fire these functions off on when the user performs that specific action. So handle remove from cart is simply just connected to the remove from cart button. We're creating another product object here to capture the product that's actually being removed from the cart. And then using this log product action function, which is on the e-commerce API within the mParticle SDK, to forward that along to mParticle. And again, these are, everything that you see here is very verbosely commented. So if you can really, for the engineers in the audience, there's not really going to be anything left up to chance or left up to guesswork when it comes to implementing this, within your own application. And this is really like while this doesn't entirely replace docs, I think what it does is sort of get you 80 yards down the field, whereas otherwise you would have to start kind of at your own end zone and kind of go yard by yard, using the docs and using, kind of just your own intuition to sort of figure out how to implement our SDK.
Hey, Sean, I think it goes actually further. I mean, I'm gonna rag on myself that I've been following along. My background's in PHP, I'm a dinosaur when it comes to coding, but it's I could see myself just copying and pasting the code from here and just making a few changes. Let's be real, we try to cheat code as much as we can, copy and paste. I'm on Stack Overflow all the time. And just use the code and copy and paste it into my production. And so I think get you to the 1 yard line. It's
no, you're right. I mean, it's well within field goal range. Probably right there on the end zone. I might have sold it a little short, but so that's the idea behind these sample apps. Really is to provide like a living, breathing source of documentation that you can actually run and you can actually test and you can get your hands on, because really the best teacher is actual experience. Docs are great and they give you a lot of really good context and the ability to kind of fine tune these implementations to meet, the needs of your own use case as you need. But really, having something like this, having something that gives you working event collection methods to just pop right into your own project is, we wanted to simplify life for engineers, because that's the name of the game. And in fact, I don't know if either Alex or Peter or any of the devs that actually built this are on the call, but I had the chance to kind of speak with both of them very closely about just what the philosophy behind this was. And both of them in a past life have, they come from places where they had to install third-party SDKs as part of their job. And so they know what that's like. They know the kind of, the frustration and the kind of, having to sort of guess at how another system works, the mental model that's behind another API that kind of may not really be totally in sync with how you are structuring data in your own application. So there's this kind of like dance you have to do to get things to kind of line up, and that takes time, that takes effort away from core data engineering, application engineering initiatives. I mean, the more time you're installing an SDK is less time that you're actually building a new feature in your app. So we wanted to really cut that down and reduce time to value of your data. So okay, so we gave some examples here of how the code works in this app, and I think probably now we can go back to our live stream, and I think we can at this point we'll probably be able to see some outbound events. Yep, and in fact we see those. So these are all of the events that are actually being forwarded to the webhook that we set up a little bit earlier. We filtered by outbound to specifically just see everything that's going in that direction. And if we go over here to the webhook itself and webhooks.site, we can actually see that all of them have arrived in our destination. So, and just that quick amount of time, we were able to set up a complete flow of data, right? We set up our sample app, we got it up and running. We generated a web API key, an mParticle, to establish that as an input. We verified that data was coming in the live stream. We set up our output as the webhook, created the connection, and then now we have data going from the point of collection, the point of the data being generated, which is the UI, all the way out to this webhook that we just spun up. So I mean, a webhook is like kind of a trivial example. I mean, we're using it for the purposes of this demo because it's quick, it's easy to get kind of spun up and running. But you can replace that webhook with anything, any downstream system where you can send your data. That could be that can be an analytics tool. It can be a data warehouse. It can be I mean, you name it. An advertising tool. You can send it to any of your ad partners. Through our direct integrations. And another great thing about that is once you have this implemented, once you have data collection set up in your application with mParticle, your marketers and your product folks are not going to need your engineers to come in and set up new integrations every time you want to use a new tool. Literally, all you need to do is just grab an API key, or I mean, setting up the credentials kind of varies depending on the tool, but it's a very sort of plug and play UI-based workflow once you already have the SDK set up to add new tools, to remove tools that you have integrated, and there is a whole host of other detailed features and ways that you can kind of use and federate and filter your data that is kind of beyond the scope of this particular workshop. But just wanted to give you the idea that this relieves you of the need to install another vendor's SDK every time you want to use one, to update multiple vendors' SDKs every time there's some sort of a configuration change, and that eliminates that kind of data chaos situation that Shafiq laid out a little bit earlier, and we were kind of looking at what this might look like in the absence of using mParticle.
And Sean, one thing I want to add on to what you're saying here is, some folks might be like, oh, this is just piping data. And I just want to reiterate, that's for the workshop, that's what we're doing. But once you instrument your sources, then, today you have one app, tomorrow you have 3, and the next day you have multiple sources of data coming in, and things change. How do you tie that to a particular profile so that you can activate it and use it to unlock? Because, for example, if taking the toothpaste example, if I had done that on my computer, but then maybe I got a push notification on my phone, maybe like 5 minutes later, I would be like, oh, and then I can just push a button, go to the app in my phone, and complete the purchase. So having that cross-platform, having that cross-device, having that being able to tie all information from different sources together really gets you that true one-to-one personalization experience, which a CDP offers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it delivers better experiences for your customers, more personalized experiences, but also internally, it frees up a lot of time for your developers to kind of really focus on the things that that matter a little bit more. That's probably a better use of their skill set. Ultimately, I think you want your developers to be working on core features, and improving features and kind of building stuff, rather than kind of just tying data together, which is important. It's not to say that it's not important. It obviously is, but I think when I had a conversation with Alex about this, who's the developer who created our our web sample app, and he was kind of just thinking back to when, he was working back in his days working in media and having to kind of maintain all these SDKs that were tracking like media event data in real time. And he was just saying it would always kind of just be this thing that like you just want to get out of your way, because it's not your core job, and it's just taking time away from you building the product, and kind of moving the needle forward and in the way that you can most effectively.
I don't think any developer got into their craft to instrument apps and to collect data.
Yeah, probably not.
Totally
Probably
feel
not.
you there.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, and to that point, this is like we're seeing this as like a living, breathing product that we're going to that will update. We'll keep up to date with new SDK features as we roll them out. It's going to be something that obviously is maintainable, and it's actually it is out there and open sourced as well. So I mean, anybody who would like to kind of submit a PR, if there's something about the sample apps that you think would be helpful to include, kind of another feature or another, maybe like another UI flow, that would be cool to have in there to see like different kinds of events instrumented. I mean, feel free to contribute to it. I mean, it is open source, and it's just out there in the community now. So
yeah, and to that point, businesses can also use the sample apps to do internal POCing, to apply it to their specific use cases, right? It can be, it can be used for those purposes as well. So yeah, that's definitely a great suggestion, Sean. All right. Well, I think we are we're completed the workshop portion of the day. If there's any questions, please do reach out. You have my personal email address. Please reach out if you have any questions. Otherwise, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great. It's fun doing these. We definitely plan to do more workshops in the future. So please keep your eye out on future workshops to talk about other use cases. Alluded to one we did with Amazon about a month ago or 2 months ago now, where we actually built a product recommendation engine. So keep coming to these. Really appreciate your attendance, and we'll call it there. Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.